seeing this the whole time. Megan is going to do that screen share. So basically, I think they should be able to see it. You should apparently be able to see it now. I am also just going to, for a backup, record me doing this. So please just bear with me again while I try and make the voice record. I think I don't want us to wait behind too long, but I know there were some more people. So Megan is also going to stand by and kind of monitor that no other little people are popping up. And someone else is just running. Oh, okay, that's good. Okay, all right. But I am conscious about leaving it too long otherwise. I would really need to be able to know with a voiceover on my phone again. There you go. Yay. Yes, please, Megan. Oh, it's not. That's great. Hooray. Okay, it's going. Oh, thank you. Great. Okay. So let's get cracking then, because I also know that things frequently come up and sometimes people, put aside time in their diary and then it gets completely eaten up by crises and the rest of it. So that does happen and we all acknowledge that. But what I sort of have done with this presentation is I've kept it fairly loose as the PowerPoint goes. And then my intention is to come back and make sure that I add the kind of relevant information if people need me to focus on one thing more, if people have specific questions and that sort of stuff needs to go in. So don't stress if it's a fairly basic sort of outline on the PowerPoint. I can always go back and add some stuff in, and the beauty of having voice recorders, it can move it over to a transcript for me as well. And so then I can add those into the notes. So please don't feel stressed. I know sometimes you want to listen and then take notes and it can all feel a bit overwhelming, but yeah, I wanted to make sure I was still being responsive to people's needs. Thank you, Danny. And Danny has just so lovingly brought me my notes. So we're off to a good start. So I didn't even know I made it do stuff. So I'm very excited that when we click, it's going to fly around and do all that stuff. But most of you, I'm sure actually all of you would have seen the flyer. So I guess just a little bit of an introduction. So I probably should also start with, my name is Hannah. For those of you who haven't met me or haven't sort of, engaged with me yet, if you kind of saw this from somewhere else, I'm a mental health occupational therapist here at Sisu Therapies, which is the business I founded. And one of my really big passion areas is LGBTQIA plus inclusiveness, making sure we have gender affirming care, and also just making sure that I guess, we're sharing that knowledge as well. Definitely we're starting to see a bit of a change now. And I know when I put this flyer out there, lots of people were telling me about these little projects in the background that are going on, where people are making trainings and that kind of thing, which is absolutely wonderful. But yeah, I thought we'll start off with something that's kind of for everyone, and it's shareable. So, if you're not in an organization that has that available or not available yet, you'll still have something. So what we'll cover, obviously, we'll have a bit of a chat, but, again, this is for everyone. So we'll just quickly go over those terms and identities, because as well, I think sometimes, the amount of stuff or that new technology, the new terms, sometimes people can kind of get a bit put off by that, or that extra learning. They're like, oh, I don't feel like I know what this is, or I'm not comfortable. And it almost becomes an additional barrier. So, one of the things I wanted to do was just quickly go over it and say, hey, look, this is ever evolving, but this is where we're at. And then talk a little bit about, about that statistics and evidence, because there is a huge amount of empirical evidence. This is a very well-researched area. And I think when you're looking at combating the myths that are around and a lot of the misinformation, it's really good that you can actually know 100% that this is a really well-researched area, and you can kind of use that. I don't think that'll be the solution to all the misinformation, because if it was, we wouldn't have that problem with so many issues. But at least, I guess, particularly for those of you who are practitioners and do come from an evidence-based kind of framework, you can feel confident in that, yes, this is evidence-based. We know this stuff about people's mental health. And then also wanting to finish off with practical tools to create an inclusive space. And I always like to have these presentations finish with something practical, because the knowledge is always wonderful, but when you walk away, I want you to be able to like implement something. So I'm going to try and do that at the end. I'm shocking with timekeeping. So even if I don't make it there, because I like to get off on a tangent, I will make sure that I put those in the presentation. And the other thing I guess I want to say is that this Lunch and Learn series is interactive and it's responsive to the community. So if you have a question after, please feel free to reach out. It's not just this session, that's it. We can answer questions. And if we don't know the answer, because we're certainly not the experts on everything, we want to be able to help you find the information. It's all about that kind of community engagement and really peer learning. So that's the huge focus for us. So after the presentation, if something doesn't make sense, or even if you're watching this later, please reach out to us and we will help you with your learning journey. On that note, I just want to acknowledge completely that this presentation is collated from a number of resources. Again, we are not the experts on this, even though it's a passion area, and we really pride ourselves in making sure we're up on the latest evidence and all that kind of feedback from the community. The information from this has been pulled from other organisations, and I will list those as well at the end and make sure they're on there, because it's really important that we direct our energy and our resources back into those very specific LGBTQIA plus run organisations. So sometimes, again, this for me is about collating all that information and making it easy for people to access and start their journey. But it's just an overview, and I've tried to touch on a few things, but very much you will probably have to continue your learning and we will help you do that, but definitely want to give the credit to those organizations. So one of them in particular, I'm sure you've heard of other ones, but Mind Out is the mental health part of the LGBTQIA plus health network, and I'm one of their champions. So basically a lot of the information I've done from there, and I've pulled that stuff from there. Alrighty, starting with the basics. Now, I also acknowledge this is a very tiny little picture, so hopefully everyone can see it, but again, I'll give the reference, for everybody to see. But I really like this picture because it was a nice, sorry, you hadn't come up yet because Megan got up. So everyone's like, what picture? That one, yay, the gingerbread man, hooray! It's just, do we want to the lights? Yeah, sorry. We're also showing it in the office with Hugo getting cuddles. So no one can see it, which is not really helpful. But yeah, so this is the genderbread person, and I always love a good infograph because it sometimes helps our learning rather than just listening to me talk. There we go. Haha, we can actually see it now. And again, wanted to do this because I know sometimes that terminology, particularly when it's a new area of learning, can be a bit of a barrier, and sometimes people get a bit nervous about it and then, can stop that engagement. So I just wanted to kind of break this down for everyone because there is some little nuances. So this really lovely kind of comes up with this genderbread person, which talks about kind of all the different aspects. So when we talk about LGBTQIA+, obviously, we're talking about people's sexuality, but also people's gender. So, your sexuality and is really kind of, that attraction, who you're attracted to. I'm trying to find it on the little sign, but anyway, yeah, so the attraction, so they're talking about the heart, so, the people you feel drawn to. But when you're looking at gender identity, that is more about your experience and how you kind of relate to that sort of, I guess that's where you're looking at your social norms around gender. So when we talk about someone being transgender, that's talking about their gender specifically. When we talk about someone being, gay, homosexual, lesbian, that sort of thing, that's talking about their sexuality. So they are two different things and they can be completely separate. So it's really important that we basically start off by saying these are two separate issues. People are very diverse and there's all these different things. And I guess what I like there is, your identity isn't definitely, how you express yourself. And it's also not your assigned sex at birth. So you'll hear me talk a little bit about that as well, but also your gender isn't your sexual orientation. So I do acknowledge that sometimes when this is a new concept, people are like, oh my gosh, it's so much to go off. But again, I think the thing that I really love about the community is that they're always so excited when people are genuinely coming to learn. And I think there's so many great resources that you can self-direct around that. And this is just one of them. But yeah, you'll hear me talk a little bit, I guess, about that kind of relationship and that attraction stuff, but also the identity and expression. And where that comes in is also when you're looking at people who are non-binary, or gender diverse. And I've got some of those definitions, so don't worry if they're all new. So I'm going to make sure I have my little glossary out. But I've added just some kind of generic ones. So I've sort of probably should have just got to this slide because it explains it better than me rambling. But your gender identity, so a person's innermost concept of a self as male, female, or a blend of both or neither. And I guess that's the other one, is that this concept where people can be fluid and gender can be fluid, because we're talking about how someone sees themselves, and we don't always have that binary system where they're like male or female. We talk about often it being a spectrum, and sometimes people can move between that spectrum, but also we have people who don't feel like they kind of fit into either box. So, you know, your sex is, you know, genetically assigned to you at birth, but that's not the same as your identity. And then you've got your gender expression, which is more about how you present yourself, your clothing, your hairstyle. So again, some people are really fluid in that and they kind of flick between the two, or some might, you know, be non-binary. It's really important as well, and I will harp on about this a little bit, that we don't make assumptions. And that's when we get to the end of it, is we always ask people's pronouns, because people have different pronouns and they will tell you and they will happily share those with you. I didn't do my pronouns at the start. What a goose. I could just launch straight into it because I was so stressed about my printer. So one of the things and questions that I've had before is, you know, for people who, let's say, look and present like the gender in their pronouns. So my pronouns are she, her. I did have a person who very much looked like a classical he, him. And he sort of said, oh, you know, with pronouns I'm asking, but I'm just confused about why people sometimes introduce themselves if it's like quite obvious. And I went, well, you know, sometimes people's expression is different from their identity. But also when I say, hi, I'm Hannah, I use she, her pronouns, it sets that precedent about that it's okay for you to use your pronouns. And so if you're introducing yourself in a big circle in the room, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, everyone can kind of use their pronouns and say that. So even if you're in a room where you're pretty sure everyone uses, you know, the pronouns that they identify by, it just means if someone does and wants to use a different pronoun, you've given that invitation. So again, that's one of those practical strategies that you can use. So that's why we have it like on our little email signatures. We use it when we talk. It's an invitation to be inclusive. And then we've got a few more, which I won't go on to, but again, looking at that like transgender. So that one is also, I'll add it in. Trans is a large umbrella. So when we talk about trans, we often think about a person who was either assigned male at birth or female at birth. So their sex reflected, I guess, the gender that they were born with. But then they transition into what we would say is almost like the opposite gender. Trans is actually an umbrella. So you have under that your non-binary, your gender fluid, all that kind of stuff. So I think, and I'll try and put that little umbrella up. So when we're talking about trans and trans people, it's actually not just those who are gender diverse from what they were assigned at birth. It's also people who identify as non-binary. There you go, beautiful. So you've got your non-binary, which is, you know, when you're neither male or female, and gender fluid is that lovely in between. And agender is neither a male or a female, like they just feel like it's something completely different. Brother, boy, and sister, girl is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander often uses those terms. And that traditionally looks at, you know, the trans population. We've got gender dysphoria, which comes up a lot. And that's when people are assigned a certain sex at birth and it doesn't match what they feel. And so they have this kind of issue where what they're seeing isn't what they're feeling. And often, as we know, as a society, we kind of have those gender norms. So often they're required to fit into this box that is really uncomfortable, and their body is a constant reminder of that. So that can be really disheartening. When we're looking at things like body dysmorphia, it's something we talk about with lots of people. We talk about that with eating disorders, just looking at yourself and feeling a certain way. And it's really difficult. I think with gender dysphoria, one of the things from working with young people is just that constant reminder. And we are very much a society who still uses those binary male and female. So it's this constant thing, and we'll talk about this when we look at the mental health statistics, where every day you are facing this trigger. So when we're looking at the mental health of this community, it is really, really poor because they're constantly having to deal with, male or female, pick one. It's like, well, I look like this, but that's actually not my experience. And it can just be this constant cycle of triggers. And then also we've got social transition and medical transition. So social is when we're talking about things like our names and our pronouns and kind of just as a discussion and that social kind of movement, whereas medical is very much when you're going and you're actively engaging in, that kind of medical model where you'll be looking at either hormones or potentially surgery down the line, things like that. So, and I believe this is in the presentation later, just because someone is identifying as trans and a different gender from what they were born with doesn't mean that they necessarily will have a medical transition. Obviously, a lot of people do go down that road, but there are lots of barriers and reasons that people don't do that. So just because someone hasn't had a medical transition doesn't make their gender identity any less valid. So it's also one of the things we really try, people not to ask too much about. Very personal. If you can imagine your own experience of having a surgery or a medical procedure, you don't really want everyone necessarily knowing the details about it, particularly when it's just curiosity. So if they bring it up and they're really willing to talk about it and they want to share that experience with you, certainly engage with them. But, it's one of the really awkward things is sometimes they always become like, this oversharing because they have to and they're invited to. And I guess that's the other thing when we're thinking about strategies we can use to be more inclusive. It's really about not having the burden. The community is constantly having to validate and educate. And, if we can kind of help out and explain some of this stuff and be like, oh, no, that's okay. We don't need to do they don't need to be forced to do all the education. That's, again, a way that we can be really inclusive and an ally to the community. Told you I was terrible at time. Pretty going. I will put up some more stuff so people can have a look at that because there is a lot of terms and I printed off because I was like, I'm going to go through all of these. No way I'm going to get through all of these. And I did have a look. I was trying to find all the flags and there was one with like all of the flags for the community. And I was like, oh, I don't know all of those. And 100%, like someone might use a term that you don't know, and that is okay. We have these wonderful things, usually smartphones in our pocket. You can Google really quickly. And it's also okay to be like, oh, I'm not sure of that term. I'll have a look. So again, you're taking on your responsibility for your learning. You're not putting that burden on them. Now, I'm just going to have a quick look at that so I can understand that. Oh, okay. And they might be like, oh, I can explain it to you. But again, you're taking on that responsibility for your learning. And so you're having a look and you're like, oh, wow, okay. And you're sort of owning that. But I've put also a sexual orientation scale up there, and that also talks a few little things. One of the things I will just add down there, because this kind of comes up a little bit, is you've got sort of, I guess, asexual. The thing that's not, I don't think it's on there, is aromantic. And asexual and aromantic are actually different. And people can be both or one or the other. It's something that I guess is a little more complex than we have time for, but I'll make sure because that community sometimes gets a little bit left out or kind of misinformation. So I'll try and put up something there about the differences between asexual and aromantic, and I guess some of the misinformation. There we go. I knew there was a word there. The misinformation about that community. Alrighty. Oh, we won't go through that too much. I was just one of the things that when I was reading, I thought this was really good, is kind of when you're obviously, particularly for providers and health providers, is looking at and reflecting on, I guess, your own experiences and learnings. But this Kinsey scale actually talks about, you know, sexuality being fluid, which I think as a society we're much better on, you know, understanding. But I'll leave that up there. But yeah, it's been around for ages. I won't have that. I won't have time. Right. So mental health of LGBTQIA plus people in Australia. So I've just put the snapshot. I might actually do some of that so it's a little bit clearer. But spoiler alert, it's not great. So these statistics, I think these ones, I have to double check, but I think these ones are from 2020. It's really hard to get. Oh, sorry, my little dog's in the background, just making noise. Thanks, Hugo. It's really hard to get updated data. There is just so much. It's really just consistently bad is kind of what I would say. Not to be too bleak, but it's kind of what we're here as well. So when we're looking at LGBTQIA plus mental health, they are nearly 6 times more likely to experience and be diagnosed with depression. Transgender people aged 18 and over are 5.5 more times likely to experience and be diagnosed with depression. And then, you know, people within the intersex variation over twice as likely. And you're looking at LGBTQIA plus people being 2.5 more times likely to be diagnosed and treated for a mental health condition. The statistics we look at as well with young people, you know, they're over 4 times more likely, 4 times as more, my brain, 4 times as likely to engage in self-injury. You know, and when we're looking at, again, trans young people, it is 6.5 times. So, you know, again, you're looking at these things where the mental health of the community is so poor. Thank you, Hugo, agreeing with me in the background. It's really poor, and I kind of will try and go through that without going into it too much. But again, it's these things where it's the everyday, I've kind of put the barriers in later, but it's those everyday experiences. And even I was hearing someone, Hugo, please be quiet. I was hearing somebody talk about coming out and that experience, and it's like, you don't just come out once and then everyone knows. It's this constant, come here. Sorry, trying to get Hugo to stop honking in the background. And now everyone's up trying to cuddle him. No one can see, but there's an intervention going on. He likes to always do this when we're having a very serious conversation to lighten things up. So thanks, Hugo. Great. Threw me off my group. But sorry, the coming out, right. So it's not just coming out and then it's done. It's like you have to come out to your family and then your friends. And every time you meet someone new and then your workplace. And we're usually assuming, you know, heteronormative relationships. So if that's something that's really difficult and anxiety provoking, let's face it, you have to experience that over and over again. And you don't know how people are necessarily going to react. And there's also emotional energy in that. And also, you know, do I decide to correct the person who's just serving me, you know, at the shop? Do I do that constantly? Like, how much energy do I have? Like, we're really depleting people. So it's not even those big prejudice, which obviously do make a huge difference. It's the kind of little everyday stuff. And we talk about sometimes those microaggressions, and I might put up a definition for microaggression. So it's not just the big events. And we have had a lot of really horrible conversations that people have had to be witness to in the community. It's not just those big events, which are really draining and awful on people's mental health. It's the little things they have to go through every day, the little extra hurdles. So yeah, we've kind of gone through this. The statistics are bad, basically. The one that I always reflect on is that basically half of the community have considered suicide in the past 12 months. It is extremely high. And I think that's why, you know, health services and governments often acknowledge it, but then I don't feel like there's lots of traction, which can be really frustrating. I won't go into these too much just for time, but I've included them as well because I think it's really important that, again, when we're talking about the LGBTQIA plus community, we're getting their insight, you know, they're giving us the feedback. And there's been, again, some really awful, I guess, experiences that they're having. So, you know, this is when they're seeking health access. So you're coming in, you're vulnerable, you're looking for that support, and then you're having a horrible experience, not just, you know, horrible within the health, just generally some of the stuff that people kind of say and feel like they can put their opinion on you. It's not too nice. So I've put up the statistics there as well, specifically around the trans community as well. And then this is a little graph on barriers that, again, I'll kind of go into barriers a little bit later. So what I'll do is I'll put some more notes up for that on the PowerPoint presentation. So what I thought I'd then get into a little bit more as well is, I'm just trying to think, I didn't put it, this is basically, I thought I'd sort of address some of the myths and misconceptions as well. I will, again, put more of these up, particularly when it comes to the trans community. There's a lot of misconceptions. I know that as well, there is some confusion sometimes because the media will talk about, let's say, young people under 18 who are transitioning and accessing services. They'll often talk about the American model and not the Australian model. And so sometimes people have assumptions around if a young person in Australia decides to get gender affirming care and what that looks like, because they have this kind of really very much misinformation around what those services look like. So for example, here in Queensland, we have the hospital runs the gender clinic. Most states have very similar, run through the public health system. Basically, it is extremely, first of all, hard to get into because there's a huge wait list because it's pretty much them or nothing. And then there's also, I guess, the misconception I want to address around, when you go in, you can pretty much, under 18s, they'll just have surgery. And it's not like that at all. There is a huge lengthy process. It is, again, another trigger because all of a sudden, even though these young people are receiving wonderful gender affirming care, you've got to go through the hoops. You've got to make sure, your mental health is supported. You have to have a mental health clinician on board to be supporting you with that kind of stuff. You have to make sure you're competent and able to do that kind of managing those hormones. We've got to make sure that your mental health is in a place where all of a sudden you're going to have these huge hormone swings. How do we look after you with that? So it's not just you go in, it's a number of it's an intake appointment, and then it's talking to you about your goals, and then it's the education session. And you're not looking at surgeries till way once you're 18 plus. It's a really huge way down the line. So often people are talking about, young people making these decisions about their body. It's like, no, that's not what happened. It's actually really, really, really hard for them to even get, the therapy around their hormones and things like that and puberty blockers. So again, sometimes the media portrays it as this, you walk in and you get it and, oh my gosh, all the kids are doing it. It's not like that at all. You're lucky if you get an appointment, basically. So they're not just, handing these things out willy-nilly. And one of the things I included in this with the statistics, because I thought it was a really important point, often people use that argument about, they're going to, change their mind and the regret once they've undergone this surgery. It actually, the evidence that we have is that it's less than 1% of transgender people who undergo the surgery who then report regret. So that's really striking when you look at the broader population where it's 14.4% when they're looking at similar surgery. So we're talking about plastic surgery. So we've got 15% for plastic surgery, which you can pretty much, there is a much lower threshold to get that versus 1%. So, I think with all medical procedures and intervention, you are always going to have, side effects and things like that and people who start it and then it's not the right for them. But again, that is a huge number. And it's even higher. I went through and I've added them in, but it's really, really high versus 1% is incredibly low. So what we know is that actually this surgery is incredible in this uptake and the difference it makes to people's lives. And I guess the thing as well that I always talk about when people sort of ask me and they're like, but young people and they're still developing and what if they change their mind? I'm like, yeah, yes, again, less than 1%, but also, people are like, what about their bodies? I'm like, but what about their mental health? We know that gender affirming surgery is one of the really key things in helping someone, feel good in their body and help their mental health. So when we look at the mental health statistics, which are so dire, and, when we're looking at that, not just depression, but that really pointy end with the suicidal ideation and attempts, and we're looking at the statistics for gender affirming care, for me, there's no comparison because it's like we have this huge dire problem and it's so well uptake and, regulated and all that kind of stuff. So again, when people are talking about this stuff in the media, I think we don't have the complete picture because they don't talk about these statistics. And again, just because you have them, I don't think that means people will necessarily take them on board. But yeah. So as you probably guessed, this is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this area. Oh, I've put a reference in there so it has a 1, but it doesn't come up. But, very much the community is saying, look, we have very specific needs. Obviously, it's that kind of thing about equality and equity. It's like we're not all giving everyone the same. We're giving people what they need. And so what I want to kind of take as the message for today, when you're looking at these practical strategies and what you can do, is that it's not just around, doing the same thing for everyone. That kind of idea that, we treat everyone the same. It's like, well, not everyone needs exactly the same thing. So it's about being able to respond to people's needs. And because we know the community has such disproportionately negative effects, we need to kind of look at how we meet their needs, and that's how we make everything equitable. I feel okay. So we're sort of moving towards the strategies here, moving through the statistics, hopefully getting to some nice stuff. And again, I will put in more of like some point forms, but I just thought a nice little kind of enablers and barriers would sort of help kick us off, because when you know what the issues are and what helps, you usually can kind of then implement that in your own everyday life. So what we know is that when, and again, this is obviously I'm an occupational therapist, so that's like a lot of the stuff I was looking through for health, but I will also try and, make it accessible to everyone. But, very much what enabled them is practitioners that are trans and gender affirming and knowledgeable. So when you have and take on this kind of practice and you do these things, there is an instant comfort level. And again, we'll go through strategies soon. Making sure that you have available and accessible peer support. Peer support has been identified as one of the huge strengths of this community, and basically really can bolster that mental health. So when we're looking at very practical strategies that can help the mental health, it's linking them in with peer networks. So again, if you're thinking about what you can do practically, knowing where in your community people can access that or where online, and taking that burden off them, that is a way that you can be an active ally and contribute to the community. So when someone asks you that, you have that list ready to go. So again, information on services that are inclusive, safe and affirming. So for example, I know in Logan here, we've got the Safe Spaces program. So there is a website where you can see who is identified as a safe space, and not only support their business, but that's somewhere where you can go. There's lots of, I think, I'm just going to say, I don't know if they're ACON, but Acon have their, welcome here signs. You can see that and stuff. And again, when we're looking at strategies, it seems like a really basic thing, but having those signs is actually incredibly important. The community has come back and said, you know what, when I see that, I feel welcome. I can visibly see that someone has taken the effort and time to say that I'm welcome here, and it makes them feel better about coming in. So again, something that we can do, which is really, really easy, actually makes a difference to the community. We're looking at the choice, because we're sort of, I guess I'll talk about the barriers, but, access to those services as well. When we're looking at places like the Gender Clinic, which is such an amazing service, it is unfortunate that the wait times are horrendous. But yeah, we really want to look at flexibility in service. And obviously some of that is outside our control, but again, we're thinking about all the things we can do. So barriers, and, we're looking at things like, I won't go too much, but that, pathologizing. And that's, again, one of the strategies. I think if you're here today, you're probably not using pathologizing language, but very much that very medical model of, it's a disability or it's a disordered way of thinking, there's something wrong with you. I'll have to find out exactly when, but, it was for a long time considered a mental health condition, when you're identifying as trans, and that was really sad. It's only recently moved out of being like a diagnosis. One of the things that's really important as well is about having to relive that trauma. So every time someone has to tell their story again and again and kind of go through that details, they have to relive that. And this is, one of the things we actually hear a lot in mental health is every time you see a new practitioner, you're like, oh, here's my life story again, new person. It's just exhausting. And obviously the number of people that have to, you have to retell your story is when you're in the community it's even more exhaustive. So if we can take that burden off them, if we don't need those details, we don't have to make them do that story, we can be supportive and talk about that. And I think sometimes, again, if you're thinking about practical strategies, even if you're doing some sort of intake with someone, acknowledging that, being like, oh, I'm sorry, I know you've probably done this before. I think that's really valuable because, again, it's about just making sure the community feels seen and heard. And it's like, oh, we have to do this. I know it's a pain and I want to acknowledge that you're having to take on this burden. Let's get through this as much and support each other. Yeah, so I guess all this kind of, rural and regional, obviously we know is tricky, lots of barriers. I don't think there's many surprises there. So I probably won't go through all of this because it's fairly self-explanatory, but this is the very basic guide to kind of how to be an affirming service. So I'm not going to go through that, but again, it's also, things we've talked about, like treating everyone as an individual, being knowledgeable, making sure you have that, inclusive visibility. Nothing really groundbreaking there. And I guess I touched on this as well, but, obviously when we're looking at the mental health of the LGBTQIA plus community, those statistics are really horrible. So sometimes we can get bogged down in that. But as well, if we're looking at those strengths and resilient capacities and really promoting that, and again, doing that through peer networks is a really good way to do that. We're starting to bolster the community. So it's not just coming from that deficit-based model. We're really looking at the strengths and enhancing that. And last one, my slide fallen off there. Oh no, my list is gone. That's okay. I'm now just going to casually talk through some strategy. So I kind of have touched on the big one, but I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit. We don't have many people, but I was going to see if people in the chat wanted to ask specific questions about how they could do it in their workplace, but we don't have a whole heap of people, so I'll just rattle off some of the common questions and then I'll throw it open to the floor because I was hoping to have a bit of discussion, but that's okay. No one has to be put on the spot. So yeah, we've talked about some really practical things like visibility and understanding the terminology, and kind of having that all with you. I'm just going to see if I have in my beautiful little notes. The thing that I actually was really surprised at when I was kind of collating all the information for this presentation is there is a lot of it out there for free, which is wonderful. I do also understand, though, when I was going through this is what happened. That's why the presentation is almost so bare. There's so much information and you have to go through it and you have to find that it's relevant and you have to cull. So I do also appreciate that people are like, oh, I want to look for things. Oh, there's so much and I don't know exactly what I want. So again, my hope for today was like, okay, this is everything here. This is where you go for this part. This is this bit of knowledge you want, and kind of you can direct your knowledge from there, because it's like that thing where there's a lot, but it's almost overwhelming then, and you don't kind of know where to go to. And there are some American sites which are fantastic, but obviously not necessarily culturally relevant to us. And there are some Australian sites. So again, I'll list these, but -18, fantastic. The LGBTQIA plus health network are really wonderful. You have so many of these lovely services. A con are really great, but I'll put all their links up. But yeah, I certainly don't feel like we're the be all and end all, but again, knowing how to navigate those services can sometimes be helpful. All right, so again, I was kind of going to specify this because yeah, there is lots of information specifically, let's say if you're working with the trans community and you want more information on things like chest binders and kind of the hormone therapy and stuff like that, I'll put that up as a pathway because there are probably people who are more, that's more relevant to their area of work, whereas other people might just be looking to make more of an inclusive workplace. The other thing when we're looking, I guess, generically about how you can make any place more inclusive is really talking about that language. So using terms like partner instead of, husband or wife, just not assuming. So one of the things that it does take time as well, and you will make mistakes, like we all make mistakes still, you just correct yourself. Trying to do that idea of, do you have a partner rather than, assuming that someone is, heterosexual, kind of getting into that. Really practical things like if you have a form, adding, your pronouns on it. You're making sure they feel comfortable about that. Do we really need to collect people's sex? Sometimes, yeah, there's unfortunately some medical restrictions where, if we're working in a certain workplace, we do have to. But do you need it there? It's kind of on every form. And sometimes I'm like, do we actually need that? Do we need that person to have to go through that every single time? So what kind of information can you get rid of there? I did have another thought, but yeah. When you are, I find, in those situations where, like, for example, I know with us, a young person might come in and have a chosen name, and obviously we will use that chosen name. Their Medicare card, let's say, might not reflect that. And so there might be some documentation, or if we're writing a report, where we have to use their birth name. And I always ask as well if the young person prefers it as birth name or death name, because that is a choice that some people make as well. I'll try and mentally remind myself to put up some stuff about that. So I just acknowledge that. I say, hey, look, you might see on, maybe it's like, some of our official reports that I have to use your birth name there. As soon as I can, I will change it to your chosen name. But I wanted to make sure that you knew that, because again, you're just being mindful of people's triggers. And I guess, again, if I'm talking about really practical things that you can do, being trauma informed is one of the key things, because again, yeah, harped on about, but it's a very traumatized community. I think as well, just understanding what is going on politically. You don't have to be too involved. But for example, we know that when they were looking at the marriage plebiscite and there was that kind of discussion, the mental health of the community was really impacted. And that's because all of a sudden the things that, are everyday experience for you, like who you love, is now becoming a commonplace conversation. And everyone's got an opinion on it. And it's, exposed to you on billboards and on the news. And, these prejudices are then brought into the spotlight. And that's really difficult. So every time we have an incident, these things, remember that people are being exposed to that trauma and re-trigger. And that's the time that you have to be a bit more mindful. It depends on the person. Not everyone, again, it's tricky because, yeah, please don't assume that everyone has the same experiences. They don't. But again, it's just that mindfulness. And I think the way that you can kind of help support people, it's lots of little actions. I'm just thinking again about really practical stuff that people have asked me. If you misgender someone, it happens. The way to just kind of do that is you just basically correct yourself, apologize, and move on. So I've got Megan next to me. So if I said, oh, Megan's changed her chosen name to Tom, I'd say, oh, Megan, are you going? And then Megan might say, oh, Tom. And I'd be like, oh, sorry, Tom, are you going to? And then you apologize, so you acknowledge it, and then you kind of go on. And again, you're not taking that burden onto them. They're not having to do it. So yes, you do acknowledge it. I know sometimes people are like, oh, I feel really bad. I just kind of like skated on. It's like, well, it's okay to acknowledge it, particularly when people start that social transitioning process. Oh, people are really welcoming and okay. They're like, yeah, I know that people are going to get it wrong. It's totally fine. As long as you are making an effort and they can see that you're actively engaged in making that effort, people are realistic and very forgiving. So I think as well, sometimes people get in their own heads about this stuff. They're like, oh, I don't want to do this, or, like there's so much to learn. It's like, just take little steps. It's okay. Anything you are doing to engage is better than nothing. All right, I'm just looking through my beautiful multiple notes here. While I just flick through, is there any questions from our very limited number of participants? Is there anything you would like me to circle back on and talk a little bit more about? Otherwise, I'll just keep pressing on with some kind of stuff that I've got around outcomes. So if you do, just, I don't know. Oh, you've got, yes, Donna, you've got your hands up.
Yes. I just wanted to kind of swing back. You did mention about sharing resources around binding. I work with a lot of teens, so I just wanted to make sure that one stays on the radar of safe methods of binding. If you have some resources that you could share, please.
I do. There was a really great, actually, it was from when I was looking through the American Association of Occupational Therapy, had just amazing resources. I was like, oh, But again, unless you're looking at that, you might not have known that very specifically. I was like, look at this. This is great. They 100% put us to shame in Australia, but it was really easy and accessible. Like it was written for like parents and stuff. I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I will definitely put that up because I grabbed that too and I was like, this is so good. Because with things like binding, as you may know as well, and other people might not, it's not just as simple as taping down your chest. And again, young people are, often they're having to DIY this stuff, and there is a cost involved. Binders are expensive. It's getting better in Australia, but often I know my young people have to buy them from overseas, and it's also really hard because you're like, what size do I get? And we don't want it cutting in. They have to be comfortable. And it's also awkward about changing clothing and buying clothing and all that stuff. So it is good if you're working with that community, whether it is in like a health role. So for us, as occupational therapists, we might be helping them actually learning about that stuff. But even let's say if you're in an education setting and you just know a young person is using a binder, having the understanding of that will just make a difference. Like just having, again, that mindfulness about what that young person, or sorry, what that person is going through, again, can make the difference. So yes, I will. Thank you for that little reminder.
Thank you. And just one other question to interrupt your flow. Sorry.
No, go for it. Please give me questions.
So how do you as an organization deal with basically we've had like hate campaigns put against us for being very openly affirming in our care approaches. So I'm just wondering, have you had experience with that? And if so, how did you address that?
That's a really good question. We've been really lucky. So I think it said on the flyer, we're a sponsor for the upcoming Loud and Proud Festival in Logan. So we're on their flyers. They've sort of been sharing it on socials, and everyone's been monitoring, I guess, the comments, because social media does not bring out the best in people. So there's been a little bit of that kind of, I guess, unfun comments. None of them have been directed at us. I haven't seen anything directed at us. So we definitely have managed to skate past it, despite the fact that I'm always like, yay, out there and everywhere and all that stuff. But again, I think that's also because we're relatively new and we're a private service, not a public service. So it hasn't come up yet. I guess there's a couple of layers. I think there's probably the benefit of me being my business, and so I'm just like, I don't care, I'll argue with people, which is you also have to think about your own energy. I did see something that it was like, you will only ever change 1% of the people online that you argue with. Like, so work out if it's worth your energy. And again, it's those things where you can show them the evidence and have really clear empirical data, and they're not going to change their mind. So again, it's like, what do you engage with? And that's really hard when this is something that's really important to you, and something that I have to navigate is not getting drawn into those arguments, because I'm not going to change that person's mind. I'm just going to get upset and feel really crappy at the end of it. So I've also tried to do that. The people who, again, we haven't had to do it, but I know as well, the gender clinic here in Queensland just had a huge review. And that was basically triggered by one of the psychiatrists who worked for Queensland Health, questioning some of the stuff. So again, really awful, because it kind of came within the organisation. The positive of that is that actually came out with a glowing review, and they were like, no, wait, this is actually better than we thought. Let's give it more money. And I was like, hooray, that doesn't normally happen. But yeah, I was like, hooray. And like all that stress that we just put on the practitioners who are, getting all that horrible stuff. It is a constant thing. And I know the Melbourne, the psychiatrist there who runs the Melbourne clinic, she's also been subject to lots of, hate articles and all that kind of stuff. So I can only comment so much. And that, I think that self-care is really important. I think looking after your...
I was just going to say,
we've got a
I might
comment.
Contribute something.
Absolutely.
In my experience, a lot of hate and anger tends to come from fear.
Yes.
And so when you're getting subject to that really big hate, anger attack, sometimes it's just acknowledgement of the underlying fear, and that can help.
Yes.
So again,
that's great.
A lot of the time you don't want to even bother engaging, because it's just for the fun of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
but there are times where you can say, well, actually, we're working really hard to keep people safe from sexual predators or things like that, because that's the one I hear.
Yes.
That LGBTQI plus is just an umbrella and a cover for pedophilia.
Yes.
And so being able to say, well, actually, we're terrified of that happening and this is what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's
helpful.
Wonderful, actually. Yeah. No, definitely. And I think that's really good. Yeah, because I in workplace fine, but I have had the personal experience where I've been at a drag story time and it was basically taken over by protests, and it was really awful. Like, we ended up being kind of locked in a room and the kids were kind of freaking out, and I was like, this is traumatizing them. And it was really horrible as a mom as well. Like, it's you can't, you know, protect yourself from everything, and this was like right at the start when these things were happening, so no one thought it was just really out of the blue. And it's like, you know, again, when you can combat that stuff, I really love that strategy. Like, oh yeah, you know, like engaging in a way, like you kind of can tell a little bit, like, oh, what are your concerns? You know, where that's able, like, oh, okay, let's have a dialogue where you can. And then being like, oh yeah, no, actually we are, you know, this, and we're supporting the mental health. And sometimes, yeah, that can take the wind out of the sails. And other times, yeah, you do just have to kind of wrap around that self-care support. I think, yeah, looking after, if it's a team thing, looking after yourself as a team. I know that sounds a little bit, you know, basic, and kind of, it is that stuff. I think when you're looking at also your values, you know, again, it is incredibly draining, but it's like looking back at, okay, you know, why are we doing this? You know, what are we gaining from it, and trying to look at it that positive. Again, though, I do completely acknowledge that it is really hard. It's also really hard as well, I think, when you work in this area and then you're very passionate about it. So you follow lots of different things like on social media. And I know sometimes I'm like, oh, nope, I need to turn off from this and not watch it because it's too much. So again, you have to do a bit of that self-reflection, which can be really hard, because it's like you want to keep engaging, you want to keep learning, but also sometimes it's okay to step back and just take a breath and look after yourself. I think doing things like connecting with like-minded peers. So, you know, again, I'm really lucky I have the Mind Out champions. So we talk about this kind of stuff, and that's talking about barriers more so within organizations. But the most successful thing I think we've talked about with that group is it's just nice to have a peer network to lean on and be like, oh, hey, what are you guys experiencing? What have you gone through? And again, like engaging with other people about those wonderful strategies, like, you know, multiple heads are better than one. What can other people bring to the table? Because yeah, sometimes we do have to think creatively about this, or, you know, there's differences in different areas and geographical areas. Even with Brisbane, you know, you've got different kind of areas. So I think collaborating where you can, and if that's something people are interested in, I'm always happy to kind of like set up some little networks. I think, again, you've got the internet and social media can sometimes be used for good, but yeah, finding these nice little pockets where you can kind of talk about this stuff. And, you know, the festival coming up is a really nice celebration, and, you know, trying to get some of that positive messaging out there too. I just thought the little thing, does it cut us off when the time is done? Oh, it doesn't. It just like warning me the meeting. Great. I didn't know if everyone's just going to get
trying to cut off for like timekeeper.
Oh, good. Well, I like that. I appreciate that. Yeah, but I am going to put up, so I'll add in basically some stuff around, you know, how we can kind of the improving outcomes prevention stuff, because again, I was like, well, let's just kind of see what people bring. But again, I think a lot of this we've talked about, it's around kind of like pumping up those positives and kind of using that connection. I think, again, that's a really good question. Like, you know, how can we connect with our community? I think as well, when you're looking at people kind of attacking you, or looking at, like, I guess those systemic issues, if we use that systemic lens, it's like, where are you going to get the most traction? So arguing with someone who has their views set and you're never going to, like, you're just going to get into an argument with, you know, versus trying to use your energy to kind of maybe amplify that or connect with people, because you only have so much energy. So how are we going to use it, you know, well? And it is tricky. I do completely acknowledge that. And yeah, I don't know. Are you still having to go through that stuff with the hate campaign, or?
Sorry, I put myself on mute. Yeah, so we rebranded a bit over a year ago, and we very much incorporate a lot of the rainbow in our business logo, and wearing the -18 lanyards and our pronoun badges, visiting, you know, in the community. And yeah, we had pushback from a few parents that we were forcing an agenda down their children's throats, and a school that refused to let us wear our lanyards as well. So I was just
Oh,
curious if anyone else had
that's
experienced that.
fun. A school.
Yeah, we're
I
in
am.
a small town of 4,000 people too. So
Oh, because I was going to say I'm a bit snarky sometimes. Like I always like to get on my little box. I did have someone kind of once say to me, they're like, you don't have to go so hard on social media. And I'm like, I do. That's the point. It's the idea of being an ally is you're not just, sitting past, you're getting in there. And then they got a lecture, so jokes on them. But sorry, I enjoy kind of like trying to find those areas where I do have a bit more kind of wiggle room. So if it was a school, again, kind of got to think about if it's a small town, like not burning all your bridges. But is there someone a little bit above that might be able to help you? Or, and again, you don't have to be combative. You can be like, oh, hey, I just wanted to look at the policy. We've got, and, trying to find the right person to have that conversation with. Sometimes, again, it's an energy thing. It's like you have to decide. It's like if the decision is kind of being, standing up for what is right and like really advocating to wear your lanyards, which you should be able to do, versus then you not being able to see a young person. Sometimes you have to make those horrible, hard choices where you're like, you know what? I am going to do this because I really want to see this young person and they really need the support. And so you kind of do have to like adjust and accept that. Yeah. And it's horrible because it's those compromises you don't want to make. But sometimes you also have to be like, okay, I'm just going to focus on what I can do, like a little circle of control. What can I control? What can't you? You just have to make a decision. And, it's tough. I get that. Yeah, it's really hard. I can't believe we haven't had anyone. But again, I think the good thing is, and I've sort of said this, is at least when you're branded everywhere, you're not going to have too many people who seek out your service who aren't into it. Like, again, we're private, so it's a bit different, but I make it like very obvious that we are, past the pronouns and what do it's okay to be you and all that stuff. Because
and
but I want families to
look at that with, when you come in our door, we've got the "You are welcome" here. I wear the "You can be yourself with me" flag badge. We're very openly neurodiversity affirming and gender affirming here. So I think it is that that maybe that initial switch for people, it was like, oh well, I don't want you brainwashing my child, and that fear response. So perhaps now that we've been around for a little while and certainly have extended into sort of areas, I mean, I myself have of trans young people in my caseload. So I think with getting that word out, it's definitely helping find the right match of people as opposed to just who's the closest.
And I guess as well, if you're looking like, you've made like the connections. And I think it was really lovely when they were doing the Loud and Proud, the press conference, one of the performers who's doing some drag king stuff, which was really amazing. He was talking about his experiences of coming from a rural place, and obviously you feel even more outside there, and then finding this community and this connection. So again, if you've got a few young people, it's sometimes nice that they kind of know and kind of have this space. So again, yes, it's try and remind yourself of all the wonderful things you're doing, and sometimes being an ally is not fun, or but it's you've made it because it's a choice that you want to do.
I think that power of peers is really strong as well.
Yeah.
So when you've got people that would otherwise just want to stay Switzerland on socials and things like that, encouraging them to say, not necessarily be in anyone's face, but just say, well, actually, that's okay.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
And like that presence.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing as well. We talk about like safety for yourself and other people. So again, the community have to make their own choices about when's it safe to come out or when do you just kind of let it lie, which again is not a choice someone should have to make, but reality. And I think as well, there's also that concept with being an ally. When can you be in, like, when's it safe, or how much can you do with your allyship? Sometimes, you can be out there going full and hard, But other times, yeah, it's maybe just that little kind of sneaky, like I've got the rainbow on and you and I know what it means, but we're not, it's about what is safe for you to do. And I guess as well, that's something to keep in mind. And again, it's that longevity, like, yeah, okay, I have to just do this at the moment, but it means that this young person or, this person will get that kind of help. And yeah, again, we shouldn't have to make these compromises, but unfortunately, that's the world we live in, which is not ideal, but yeah. Oh, any more questions? That's actually 5 minutes over is good for me, but yeah, I just got so much information that I just got overwhelmed. I was like, I'm just going to start talking and see what people bring, but I'm going to go back over that PowerPoint and I'm going to try and look at kind of more specific stuff and kind of tailor it to where the need is. But like I said, I know that people like to live with very practical strategies. So I'm going to make sure I do that and try and direct people where they want to go, because there are some fantastic resources. And I know, like with mental health and suicide prevention and that kind of stuff, there's the whole idea of intersectionality, which is looking at, when your culture, let's say, and your community cross, and, also when you're looking at being sexually or gender diverse, lots of different things. There's so many resources and so many ways to go. So my hope is that people kind of get a little bit of an introduction, maybe make some connections here, and then it can kind of take them to the next level. So very much today was like a roadmap. So yeah, hopefully, and if I don't cover something, if you see, or you're like, actually, do you know if this is a resource? I'm very keen to help out with that. And that's, I guess, the good thing about being in the Little Champions Network is that I don't have all the answers, but I've got lots of other colleagues in different positions all over the state, not just health. And I can ask them very quickly and see what they've got or what they can direct to. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. I will let you get on. Unfortunately, sorry, Donna, I'm not going to lie, we have cake here. So we're going to have cake, and you didn't get to see the little Frenchie. He's asleep. I feel very mean that you're getting targeted and we're going to have cake and dog cuddles. So brutal. But yes.
It's just the luck of the draw.
Oh no, I know. I'm like, oh, I probably shouldn't have told it. But yeah, we will eventually. I have to actually be pretty on top of getting this up, because I think they're using it to help train some of the volunteers for the Loud and Proud Festival. So it will be up soon on our fantastic YouTube channel, which has a whole one video. But yes, you can send it to your colleagues. Like I said, always happy for people to ask us questions, because an hour is not much time. But
so it'll be all on our website. If you want to look at it on our website, it'll have this, and then our previous lunch and learn that we did last month as well, and any of the future ones. If you miss out on them and you want to join, just check that out, and it'll be on there.
And every month as well. So Donna, where are you actually from? Sorry,
I'm
location-wise.
Delaney, Sunshine Coast Hinterland.
Oh, there you go. Oh, well, if you're ever around our area, please come and visit. I know we're Logan, so we're kind of like south. But yes, if every Tuesday, first Tuesday of the month, we do have this. So if you ever have to come around to the Brisbane area, please come and see us, and we will bring the dog and the cake for you then.
Sounds amazing. Get me in.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and have a good day. Bye. Okay. Oh. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
I knew you weren't here. I was like, oh no, she's stuck somewhere and she's gonna freak out.
And it was just like, I was totally on time, and I finished my section and it was past, and I'm like, yes, gosh, I'm keeping goals. And then I took Mum.
Don't worry.